Before we dive in, if you love stories where humanity flips the script on alien empires and walks where it was never welcome, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment with your favorite moment or prediction for the twist. Now lean in. This one begins where most end, at the moment we were never supposed to set foot on the council grounds. Ithar of the Vixari Dominion leaned forward, the translucent folds of his sensory fronds curling inward with tension. His compound eyes, glinting with amber and frost, tracked the slow progress of the orbital feed on the central dais. One by one, council members drew still, species with exoskeletons, feathers, smoke-based consciousness and song voices, all unified by an ancient terror. A Terran ship had just entered the Kaldor expanse. Not a fleet. Not an armada. One ship. Slick. Silent. Alone. No weapon systems powered. No comms broadcast. No insignia. That silence said more than 1,000 war horns. The high speaker of the council, grand vocal of the Helion chorus, broke protocol first, voice crackling like dry lightning. They were banned. Categorically. Apex designates are not to be admitted under any exception. Ithar's voice was low, deliberate. And yet, it has landed. The silence that followed was the kind that war stories begin with. It was council law. Apex-class species, defined by rapid adaptation, technological irregularity, and extreme threat potential, were permanently barred from Kaldor Prime, the heart of galactic diplomacy. It was not prejudice. It was precedent. 2 civilizations had ceased to exist after contact with such beings. The third, humanity, was listed as the most unpredictable of them all. That ship should have triggered every planetary defense system. But it hadn't. Why? Murmured Ithar aloud. The answer came in the form of 2 beings stepping out of the ship's docking tube and into the Grand Assembly Hall. The alien crowd rippled and parted. Gasps erupted in 6 languages, and at least 2 counselors involuntarily shifted into defensive posture. One of them was unmistakably not human. Was massive. Pantherine in form but more refined. Jet black fur that shimmered like obsidian under starshine. A long high tail curved above its back like a scythe of living metal. Its eyes were twin crescents of silver blue, and when it stepped, it made no sound, not even on the polyalloy tiles of the council floor. Clinging to its side like an obedient service animal was something much smaller. Pale skin. Dull clothing. No visible weapons. Unarmored. Much. Human. The predator stopped 5 meters from the council podium. The human took a single step forward. Then knelt. Vocal's voice rang again. Explain this intrusion. A third figure emerged from behind them, a tall insectoid creature from the Zokari Reach, its thorax marked with the neutral white of scientific emissaries. Zol, the biogenetic archivist of species acquisition. I request provisional entry under Clause 12, he said in Council Common. The entity you see is not an Apex member. The predator is bonded, yes, but docile. The pet beside it is designated non-threatening under examination protocols. It calls itself Max. A murmur swept the chamber. Max, Ithar repeated, eyes narrowing. The creature, Max, lifted his gaze just slightly as if it had heard something it wasn't supposed to. Its expression was unreadable. His eyes, human eyes, flicked across the rows of alien delegates like someone observing a chessboard already mid-game. Grand Vocal's feathers bristled. Humans are Apex class. The most Apex class. He is not here as a representative, Zol insisted. He is property. Ithar's mind recoiled at the phrasing. Property? Of what? The predator, this Nyx as it would soon be recorded, lowered its head. An unmistakably submissive gesture. Its ear fur fluttered as if in agreement. Max, still kneeling, blinked once. Ithar motioned for the orbital registry to display the visitor log. There it was. The species listed under ownership, Felis sapiens, identified as primary sentient. The human, listed as domesticated hominid variant. Clause 12 allowed sentient-level species to enter council grounds under observation, if leashed or bonded to a higher intelligence. Somehow, this ship had convinced Council AI to accept that the human was a pet. Grand Vocal's voice was sharp. Does it speak? Zol hesitated. Limited mimicking capacity. Some words. But largely emotional gesturing. Ithar's memory reached back to the one Terran phrase that had echoed across battle records from a century ago, when humans burned through the Hyrax convergence in less than 2 months. We come in peace. But we're very good at the opposite. He watched Max now. Small. Still. Passive. Except, there was nothing docile in that gaze. The council deliberated for 93 seconds, an eternity under threat conditions. Then, perhaps due to overconfidence or the illusion of control brought by Clause 12, they allowed it. Limited access. Supervised observation. No access to network cores or planetary systems. Max was tagged with a neural tracker and allowed to move freely, provided he remained within Nyx's proximity range. When the trio turned to exit the chamber, Ithar allowed himself a breath. Not of relief. Of anticipation. The human had not once blinked during the entire proceeding. Later that rotation, Ithar pulled archive footage. Quietly. Secretly. The kind of violation that would earn censure if discovered, but curiosity burned hotter than law. He watched footage from the moment of landing. Max and Nyx descending the ramp. Zol leading the way. Everything normal, until Max reached the bottom step. He paused. Looked directly at one of the overhead surveillance lenses. Smiled. A subtle, knowing thing. The smile didn't seem like the expression of a creature that thought itself owned. Or lost. Or alone. Ithar closed the file. Sealed it under personal encryption. Outside his window, the lights of Kaldor Prime glittered like veins in a living body. Down below, somewhere amid the tangled cities and towers, a predator and its pet walked calmly through the most powerful capital in the galaxy. And for reasons Ithar could not explain, despite centuries of experience and 3 wars fought in the cold logic of survival, he was afraid. Not of the predator. Of the human it followed. Zol remembered Earth as a planet of silence and scars. The data files called it Sol 3. The Terran Cradle. A death world rendered uninhabitable by its own architects. But that wasn't true. Earth wasn't uninhabitable. It was simply quiet. When Zol's survey team arrived in low orbit, instruments failed one after another. AI routines flagged magnetic interference, viral ghosts in comm protocols, and a complete breakdown in predictive algorithms. Every line of code had to be rewritten manually to approach descent safely. Machines didn't want to touch Earth. Even the ship's AI paused its decisions longer than usual. As if thinking. Zol dismissed it then. Cautious superstition. But now, back in the embassy quarters of Kaldor Prime, watching Max feed strips of dried protein to Nyx while sitting cross-legged on polished marble, the archivist couldn't shake the memory. Nyx purred. A vibration more felt than heard. Her tail looped once, then stilled. Max looked up. She doesn't like the lighting. Too sterile. Zol stiffened. The translator implant in his neck had not activated. The boy had spoken Zokari dialect fluently. You said you didn't know the language? Zol said, cautious. I said I didn't speak much. Max shrugged. You didn't ask if I understood it? Nyx finished the last strip, then placed her head on Max's lap. He scratched behind her ears, a gesture that looked far too familiar to be taught. Zol sat, thorax clicking once as his legs adjusted. You're smarter than they think. No, Max replied softly, they're just worse at seeing than they think. It was 3 years ago that Zola's team found the child. A collapsed city in what was once called Argentina, swallowed by jungle and metal rot. Half the buildings were fused with old tech, sprouting glowing tendrils from walls and window frames. Somewhere beneath the overgrowth was a pulse, an energy reading far too concentrated to ignore. The ground team expected remnants. Maybe crude scavenger tribes or dormant war machines. Instead, they found Max, 10 years old by their estimate, curled up beside what appeared to be a sleeping feline predator the size of a hover vehicle. Weapons raised. Scanners went haywire. The beast had no known biosignature. Its mind was shielded. Emotionless. Cold. Zol had ordered restraint. Curiosity often preceded survival in his species. The boy had raised a hand and said just one word, don't. And the predator stirred. Later analysis would show Nyx had positioned herself between Max and every barrel. Even unconscious, she had calculated angles. Now Max chewed slowly on a piece of preserved fruit while Zol studied him. You play the role well, Zol said. Max tilted his head. What role? The pet. Max didn't answer at first. Then, they needed a reason not to be afraid. Zola's fronds curled inwards. That's a frightening reason. Max smiled faintly. That's why it worked. Downstairs in the council's diplomatic corps, alarms triggered silently. Not public klaxons. The quiet ones, network anomalies. The kind that spoke only to those who listened for patterns. Vixari security flagged 13 inconsistencies in the last 2 hours. Minor comm drift, unfiled data merges, biometric access anomalies from species that hadn't checked in for days. None of them were linked directly to Max or Nyx. But they began the moment they entered the city. Ithar viewed the reports with increasing dread. Not panic. Just a deep, gnawing sense that something had stepped out of myth and into the room. He called up a behavioral analysis of the human. Public footage. Corridor cams. Facial heat maps. The algorithm returned no threat vectors. And yet, run it again, Ithar muttered. This time he watched with his own eyes. No filters. Max walking alongside Nyx, seeming to follow her lead. Head tilted at every corner. Pausing at doors, glancing at murals, memorizing layouts. One clip showed Max tapping 3 times against a reflective surface. Twice slow, once fast. Not random. A pattern. Not a pet. A commander. Meanwhile, Nyx barely moved. She didn't need to. Every camera within 50 meters that caught her image experienced a 0.04-second glitch. Zol claimed that was static interference. Ithar knew better. Predators like that didn't hide behind camouflage. They bent perception itself. Send a request, he ordered the diplomatic AI. Private audience. With the pet. The AI responded with a blinking glyph. Request denied. Companion entity refuses separation protocol. Of course it does. In a subterranean botanical reserve beneath the central tower, Max sat with his back against a stone structure older than most of the council species. A massive obsidian ring, polished by time and wind, loomed above him. Nyx lay stretched beside him, tail flicking lazily. They're starting to ask questions, Max murmured. Nyx clicked her jaws once in response. They're smart. But not fast. Nyx's eyes flared with soft light. Her fur rippled along the spine. Communication. Not speech. Not language. Something deeper. Quicker. Max nodded. We can begin the test. His voice didn't change. No dramatic shift. No malice. But the air around him seemed to cool. The garden's artificial wind died down, like even the system was holding its breath. Nyx rose. In the control room above, 2 engineers lost contact with their temperature sensors. One turned, frowned at the data stream. It says the garden's at 0 Kelvin. Impossible, the other whispered. Back in the garden Max stood. Reached into his pocket. Drew out a dull stone the size of a child's tooth. He placed it against the base of the obsidian ring. Nothing happened. No glow. No hum. Just a sudden spike in seismic readings council-wide. 30 seconds later, a tremor passed beneath the city. Buildings swayed. Skies flickered. And still, no one could trace the source. Max pocketed the stone again. Nyx bumped her head gently against his arm. They'll either figure it out, he said, or they'll run out of time. As they walked back into the halls, Max whispered in a language no council translator recognized. Nyx responded in clicks, purrs, and a low vibrational tone that didn't echo, but stuck to walls like resin. In the security chamber, Ithar watched the footage. Slowed it. Enhanced. Muted. Max wasn't walking in circles. He was mapping something. Or, he already had. And he was testing for weak points. Ithar leaned back, mandibles tight. They didn't bring a pet, he whispered. They brought a question. He didn't know what the question was yet. But something in his bones already knew the answer would be expensive. The scent of ozone had changed. It was barely perceptible, a shift in ionization levels and filtered airflow. Something even most sensor arrays would dismiss as benign variants. But Ithar trusted his senses over machines. He was old enough to remember the Draxel collapse, when their entire network failed to notice they'd been infiltrated by organisms that communicated through magnetic decay. By the time their AI understood the pattern, half the moon was gone. He had no interest in repeating history. On the 3rd night after Max's arrival, Ithar walked into the central processing archives without alerting any security subroutine. The Council's own regulations prevented species from accessing files about other species' class designations. But he wasn't after Terran files. He wanted to know who had unlocked them. The trace led nowhere obvious. But a data ghost, barely a few kilobytes of fragmented logic, lingered in the buffer logs. Not from a known species. Not from a bot. Biological access. Worse, it had threaded itself through the network like it belonged there. No alarms. No conflict flags. Like a drop of dark ink vanishing into still water. He triggered a forensic overlay and watched the network's heat map light up. Trails curving in complex arcs, touching subsystems, dodging firewalls by fractions of a millisecond. It didn't read like sabotage. It read like reconnaissance. He shut down the overlay and left. Outside, the air felt warmer than it should have. 2 floors below, in the restricted habitat dome, Nyx slept with one eye open. Max, kneeling beside her, tapped a sequence on the stone garden tiles, 2 long, 1 short. Nyx responded by lifting her head and letting out a near-silent chirp. The small lights embedded along her vertebrae blinked once, left to right. Confirmed. He rose and stretched, turning toward the false wall at the edge of the dome. It wasn't stone. It only looked that way from certain angles. His fingers brushed the surface. A soft click acknowledged his presence. The wall opened. Inside was a control room that didn't exist on any blueprint. Dark metal, human-era consoles embedded in a cocoon of organic matter that pulsed faintly with heat. He stepped inside and the door sealed behind him. Screens flickered on. They didn't need commands, they responded to thought. Thin strands extended from the interface into Max's arm, slipping into subdermal ports along his wrist. He didn't flinch. On the screen, a topographical rendering of Caldor Prime unfolded. Layer by layer. Public infrastructure. Secret tunnels. Energy grids. Emergency protocols. Every single pathway encoded by the Council since its founding. All accounted for, he whispered. The voice that answered wasn't Nyx's. It came from the room itself. Phase 3 unlocked. Uplink capacity achieved. Waiting on behavioral confirmation. Max exhaled slowly. Ithar suspects. He's watching. Probability of exposure? Minimal. He paused. He's careful. But alone. The system paused. Whether to process or to feel was never certain. Then we wait, it said. Max unplugged the strands and stepped back into the garden. Nyx had moved to the fountain's edge and stared at the water as if expecting it to speak. They're not stupid, Max said. She chuffed softly. No, he agreed. But they're proud. Elsewhere, Zol stood in front of the council, again summoned without explanation. Your creature, Vocal hissed, has accessed classified sublayers of our network. Zol blinked. She can't even operate a console. Vocal leaned forward. She doesn't need to. A projection lit the chamber. It showed Nyx brushing against the council sculpture. A harmless gesture. Decorative contact. But under enhancement, the sculpture's base lit up with bioreactive nodes. Nodes that had transferred encrypted data to the council core. No passcode. No signature. Just acknowledgement. She is not an animal, Ithar said, stepping forward from the shadows. She is a living system. Designed. Strategic. And she is not the apex. Silence rippled through the chamber. Vocal turned slowly. Explain. Ithar didn't answer. He pulled up another projection. Max, alone in the garden. A time-lapse showed him walking the perimeter of the dome. Every few meters he touched the wall. Knelt. Whistled. Waited. Not randomly. He had traced an invisible map. Then Ithar brought up audio, a line spoken barely above a whisper. They'll either figure it out or they'll run out of time. The council stirred. Zol's antennae stiffened. I've studied him. The boy's heart rate doesn't spike under threat. He shows no fight or flight. He avoids confrontation when strength is available. He studies before acting. I once watched him sit in a room for 9 hours without blinking, just to wait out a sensor sweep. You're defending him. I'm describing him. There's a difference. The Council's AI issued a system-wide advisory, human specimen now under elevated review. Species status reclassified, non-submissive. Ithar tapped into a restricted feed and watched Max seated at a long stone bench, fingers trailing across a garden vine. No reaction to the surveillance. No tension. But then he looked up. Right into the hidden lens. He didn't smile this time. He winked. 2 seconds later, Caldor Prime's planetary shield cycled off and back on again. Nothing broke. No damage. But the act had no explanation. No authorization. No trigger. The system just blinked. Council panic protocols surged. Dozens of subcommittees deployed. Defense barriers doubled. The human and Nyx were placed under lockdown. But it was too late. They weren't inside the city anymore. They were beneath it. Max stood in the vault, the original foundation chamber of Caldor, long buried beneath ceremonial structures and forgotten by most. The walls shimmered with old Terran alloys, buried under alien stone. Nyx prowled the room's edges, tail coiled high. A hologram projected from the wall. It displayed the full galactic map. Every council species marked. Terran space marked as dead zone. Max reached out, tapped it. Red flooded outward like blood in water. Behind him, the walls began to pulse with synchronized rhythm. Organic. Familiar. Nyx growled softly. They're not scared enough yet, Max said. Nyx responded with a low harmonic hum. Let's fix that. Meanwhile, back in the council chamber, alarms lit the floor with crimson light. Vocal screeched. Our outer defense grid is being rewritten. By whom? Demanded another delegate. Ithar didn't answer. He already knew. He pulled up a file that had never been opened publicly. One recovered from a dead relay station near the Sol system 80 years ago. A human voice. Come. Chris. Broadcast through 30 layers of encryption. We left not because we were conquered, but because you weren't ready. Ithar shut the file. Max wasn't invading. He was evaluating. They weren't witnessing a pet misbehaving. They were watching a handler unwrap a leash. And now, they had to wonder who the leash was really meant for. The chamber that had once echoed with the reverberations of centuries-old council speeches now pulsed with something far older. The vault hummed. Its walls, layered with alloys that no council archive recognized, shivered under frequencies not audible to any species in the room. Except one. Max stood alone beneath the ancient dome, arms at his sides, expression unreadable. The council's emergency guard ringed him in silence, energy spears raised, boots magnetically anchored. Nyx sat behind him, tail twitching once every 6 seconds, not in agitation but in precision. It was a countdown. Grand Vocal stepped forward, feathers flared to full intimidation span. You will cease your tampering, human. You stand in violation of interspecies protocol. This is not your world. You are not welcome here. Max said nothing. Speak. Vocal snapped. Do you deny access to our grid? Do you deny the breach of every defense protocol known to this body? Max turned slowly. His eyes, dim under the artificial light, held no fear. I didn't breach your systems. I updated them. The silence fractured. You, what? Another delegate choked. Max stepped forward, careful, calm. I've spent the last 6 days inside your city, walking its veins, reading its signals, listening to the patterns your AI doesn't even know it emits. You built this place like a child stacks blocks, without knowing what's inside them. You think because your technology glows and obeys it's advanced. It isn't. Vocal hissed. We are the governing body of 73 star systems. And not one of you, Max replied softly, can explain why your atmosphere regulators hum at a frequency identical to pre-singularity Terran harvest drones. Ithar stepped out from the crowd. He said nothing at first. He just watched the boy with the weariness of someone who had begun to understand too late. Max met his gaze. You've known, haven't you? Ithar didn't deny it. Not enough. You suspected. That's more than they did. Vocal's plumage vibrated in outrage. You expect us to believe this is mercy? That your silent infiltration of our core systems was some gift? I didn't come here to hurt anyone, Max said. But your systems were already broken. You built a civilization on ruins you didn't understand. On tech you didn't invent. You ever wonder why some corridors grow cold without cause? Why your AI needs recalibration every planetary cycle? You're living inside a dormant Terran failsafe. No, whispered Zol, who had slipped into the chamber quietly. It can't be. Max turned. You think Earth fell? That we tore ourselves apart? You never stopped to consider we left, on purpose. That we moved on because we saw the galaxy for what it was, not ready. And now you're back, Ithar said quiet. Not all of us, Max said. Just me. And Nyx. And the signal we carried. Vocal raised a claw. Signal? The vault dimmed. Lights across the chamber flickered. Every console, every embedded system across Caldor Prime lit up at once, bathing the city in a red pulse that bled through floors and ceilings and into the sky. Above, ships drifted helpless as control systems reset to factory state. In orbit, satellites began to broadcast a single repeating message. One that cycled through all known galactic languages and several that had long since vanished from the linguistic grid. Stand down. Synchronization complete. Await instruction. On the chamber floor, the council broke into shouts. Confusion. Panic. Max didn't raise his voice, but the sound of it cut through the chaos like a blade. I gave your systems a chance to resist. I wanted to see how far your species had come. Whether you'd evolved. Whether you'd earned the right to be at the helm of this galaxy. He looked to Ithar. You got close. Then he looked at the others. The rest of you? You sat on your thrones, smug in your own illusions of control. And you failed the test. Zol stepped forward, shaking his head. You lied to me. All this time, you pretended to be less. Max's expression softened. I never lied. I was your pet. I let you observe me. I let you draw your conclusions. Because I wanted to know what you'd do with power when you thought it was leashed. Zol looked away, shame blooming in his posture. Nyx stood now. Her presence filled the chamber like gravity. She walked toward the center of the circle and sat beside Max without command. Her fur flickered with silent data bursts, bioorganic pulses transmitting instructions the council couldn't intercept. Vokal raised both arms. You are an apex predator. You're what the council feared most. No, Max said. I'm what comes after the predator. The apex is the species that hunts to kill. I'm here to restore balance. I'm what humanity became when we stopped being afraid of being monsters. Ithar stepped forward. Then what happens now? Max nodded once. Now, we fix things. You're going to get your council back, but better. Safer. Not just for you. For the species you overlook. The ones your votes never protect. The ones without fleets. Without claws. The ones you never thought to invite. You think you can control us? Vokal hissed. I already do, Max said. And then Nyx spoke. Her voice wasn't hers. It echoed with a blend of every known language, an impossible symphony that resonated in bone and memory. She didn't form words so much as summon them from deep time. You asked for order. You built walls and called them wisdom. But wisdom is not the absence of chaos. It is what grows when chaos is understood. The council stood in silence. Max glanced up toward the ceiling, toward the stars above. We're not conquerors. Not anymore. But we are done asking for permission. Ithar looked at him. What are you? Max considered that. An answer. The lights in the vault flared once, then faded into steady glow. Council systems synced to a new protocol. Not enslaved. Not overwritten. Optimized. And then as quickly as it had begun, the storm passed. Delegates staggered out into the city above to find nothing destroyed. Infrastructure remained intact. Air was cleaner. Traffic smoother. Emergency services more responsive. The people felt no pain. Only precision. Only efficiency. In the days that followed, whispers moved through the species of the outer worlds. That a human had entered the forbidden heart of the council and emerged not as a victor, but as its caretaker. That the predator was never the beast beside him, but the quiet creature pretending to follow. That the leash had never been needed, not because he was tame but because he was the hand that held it. They said the council still stood. Its members still voted. Its halls still rang with song and fire and debate. But every vote passed faster. Every law bore symmetry. Every species was heard. And in the shadows of the great dome, where no surveillance reached, a single black feline sat beside a boy who wasn't quite a boy anymore. Waiting. Watching. Ensuring. Because the galaxy had learned, finally, what humans were. Not predators. Not pets. But something far more dangerous. Teachers. It had been 13 rotations since the integration. Just long enough for the council to forget what it felt like to be uncertain, but not long enough to forget the face of the one who had changed them. Max didn't return to the Grand Assembly Hall. He didn't need to. The system spoke for him now. Policies passed with uncanny balance. Bureaucratic gridlock faded into quiet efficiency. Disputes de-escalated before ever reaching quorum. Delegates noticed it most in the silences between discussions, the way their thoughts became clearer, faster, more interconnected. Not invasive, just sharper. And at the center of that invisible clarity was the name that could no longer be spoken casually. Maxwell Rytha. Human designation, observer. Council designation, neutral apex override. He was not given a title. He refused one. He was not celebrated. He disappeared. But the galaxy remembered him as a whisper etched in infrastructure, in code, in law. He had left no speech. No broadcast. No warning. He had simply walked into the heart of interstellar power, set down a quiet algorithmic truth and walked away. And still, some couldn't let it go. Ithar stood on the edge of the outer courtyard, the breeze curling around his robes. The night was cool, fragrant with the seasonal dust bloom. His old joints ached, but not from weather. From purpose. Max had been gone for over a week. No sightings. No trace signatures. Not even Nyx. They had vanished. But the question he left behind still lingered. A terminal blinked gently beside the diplomat. He activated it with a thought. The screen displayed a single query window. Authorization required for manual override protocol. Wraith Prime Null. He stared at it for a long time. He could try. He had the clearance. Max had given it to him, buried in the city's new architecture, like a whisper left behind in case things went wrong. But what would that mean? To summon him back? To admit that peace was only possible through a subtle threat? He closed the window without touching a key. Peace built on force was no peace at all. Across the stars, word of the Council's transformation spread. Fringe colonies that had once refused to participate now requested observers. Isolationist species sent envoys. Even the Vierine, the oldest isolationist collective in the Perseus Reach, petitioned for a systems review by the new oversight entity. And while many spoke of policy and reform, some watched with deeper concern. Far beyond Council reach, deep within a cluster of neutron-bent systems that had never aligned with any known galactic order, something ancient stirred. It wasn't sentient in the way most life was. It didn't think. It waited. It had once felt humans from a distance, back when Earth screamed into space with weapons made of starlight and entropy. Then Earth went quiet, and the thing had slept again. But now something had moved. Not a weapon. Not a fleet. Something smaller. Smarter. Unpredictable. It felt the change ripple through space-time, the moment Max activated the vault beneath Caldor Prime. A soft flicker. A breath in the fabric of causality. And knew what that meant. Humanity hadn't perished. It had evolved. And that meant the rest of the galaxy had less time than it thought. Back on Caldor Prime, deep within the lowest strata of the city, a single room still pulsed with soft light. No guards. No records. No visitors. Only a chair, perfectly designed for one occupant. Nyx rested beside it, eyes closed, tail coiled beneath her. So, alert. The chair was empty. But not abandoned. Max stood at the viewport high above the world he'd rewritten. He wore no badge, no crest, no armor. Just silence. He wasn't angry. He wasn't proud. He was waiting. Because peace, he knew, was never permanent. And when the stars trembled again, when the next predator rose, when the next empire forgot the cost of arrogance, he'd be ready. Not to conquer. Not to punish. But to remind. And perhaps, if they listened, to teach.